Hi again, Mark here from Talking Bass. Today we're going to look at something that many of you will have encountered in passing or when learning about music theory, and more specifically jazz harmony. I'm talking about the tritone substitution. Yep, it sounds a little heavy, but believe it or not, the tritone substitution is a really simple concept, and once it clicks and you get that light bulb moment, a lot of jazz lingo is going to make a lot more sense. As always, the lesson material is all there over at TalkingBass.net. Just click that link in the info below. Also, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below. Then remember to check out the totally free membership over at Talking Bass. Talking Bass is now a complete social network for bass players. Just log in and you'll be able to connect with over 100,000 other bass players from all over the world in the forums, groups, and chat rooms. It's very much like Facebook for bass players, but with the addition of over 450 bass lessons, a ton of free practice resources, and a set of ebook downloads such as the scale reference manual. Then, if you want to take things further, there are the premium courses on everything from beginner bass to reading music to scales, chord tones, slap bass, ear training, and much, much more. So sign up today. Remember, it's totally free and join a great bass community. Now, before I get into everything here, I'm going to assume a very basic knowledge of chords and chord construction and basic knowledge of chords in a key. So if I say here's a 2-5-1 progression, you know what that is. If you need help with any of these things, I'm going to link some previous lessons on the channel in the info below. Okay, so what is a tritone substitution? Well, we've got two words in there. First of all, what's a substitution? A substitution is a chord that we substitute for another chord. Both chords will have some common notes and share a similar function. So when you substitute one chord for another, you're basically looking to keep the same feel and direction, but the substitution is going to give you a different colour or spiciness. So if I play a 2-5-1 progression in C, D minor 7, G7 to C major 7, and change that D minor 7 to a D7, we get the following progression. Okay, so you can hear there that both those chord progressions are very similar, but they have a different colour for that first chord. So here it is again, D minor 7, G7, C major 7. And now with the substitution of the D7. Very similar, but instead of the D minor 7, we've got that D7, just a different colour in there. That D7 is a substitute for D minor 7. Next we have the term tritone. So what's a tritone? Well, think of the name tritone. That's 3 tones. A tone is also called a whole step. So it's 3 whole steps. So from C, if we move up 3 whole steps, we have C to D, D to E, and E to F sharp. So C to F sharp or G flat is a tritone. And when we talk about a tritone, we're talking about a diminished fifth or augmented fourth interval. And you could also see that written as flat 5 or sharp 4. So that's a tritone. Tritone substitutions are all about dominant 7 chords. We simply substitute a dominant 7 chord with another dominant 7 chord a tritone away. So if we have a C7 chord, the tritone substitution would be G flat 7 because C to G flat, that's a tritone. And it's usually the flat 5 chord that we're using there, so it would be G flat 7 rather than F sharp 7 for reasons I'll come to in a minute. So there's C7, we want a tritone substitution for it, we use G flat 7. So before I get into why this works, let's just listen to it in action. That way we're doing more than just talking about letters and numbers. So let's take a simple 2-5-1 again in C major, D minor 7, G7, C major, and have a listen to how that sounds. So we have that stepping stone action of D minor 7, G7, C major 7 coming back to home. So I've written the chords out in the lesson material so you can play along. I'm not going to cover them all here. And let's have a listen to that progression again. D minor 7, G7, C major 7. So the dominant 7 chord in there is that G7. So let's substitute it with the tritone substitution. So instead of G7, we're going to play D flat 7. Okay, because D flat is a tritone away from G. So we have D minor 7 to D flat 7 to C major 7. So that is a tritone substitution on the G7. So let's listen to those two progressions again. Here it is, D minor 7, G7, C major 7. Listen to that feel of it coming back home, and now here it is with the tritone. Very quickly in succession. And here are the very, very similar, but we have that different colour with that D flat 7 as we chromatically move down to the C major. So this chromatic descent for a 2-5-1 is the most common use for a tritone substitution, and it's why I said that it's actually a really simple concept to grasp. Most of the time you can just think of that chromatic movement on a 2-5-1 progression. There's no need to keep thinking of theory and why it works. Just learn the application and the sound of it first. So now let's just try something for those of you that don't like playing all these chords. Let's try that 2-5-1 and the tritone as arpeggios, just basic arpeggios. So if we're going to be playing 2-5-1 in C major, we've got D minor 7, then G7, and then C major 7. Again, these are all transcribed there in the lesson material. So you can hear that movement of those chords melodically as the arpeggios. Now let's try adding the tritone substitution. So we have D minor 7, and then D flat 7, and then C major 7. Okay? So, why does this work? Well, it's actually because of another important tritone interval. If we look at the chord of C7, we have the notes C, E, G, B flat. Now, the two most important colour notes in there are the E and the B flat. That's the 3rd and the 7th. They give the chord all of that colour and its identity, really. It helps distinguish it from other 7th chords. Now, if we look at the interval between the E and the B flat, that's that 3rd and the flat 7. Notice how that's a tritone. And that tritone on its own has a very dark dissonant sound. But when you put that root note of C below it, we get that very obvious dominant 7 chord. Think blues. So like I said, here's that tritone again, the E to B flat. Put the C below it, and we get the bluesy sound. So it's the tritone in there that gives it that bite and that sound of the dominant 7. Now let's look at the tritone substitution of G flat 7. Okay, so what notes do we have there? G flat, B flat, D flat, and F flat, which you could also see enharmonically as E. This time, what do we have for the 3rd and the 7th? Well, we've got B flat and the F flat, or E. So that's B flat and E. Think of what we had in the C7, E and B flat. It's exactly the same notes. It's exactly the same tritone, but this time the B flat is on the bottom and the E is on the top. For the C7, it was E and B flat. So E to B flat in the C7 and B flat to E in the G flat. Same notes, same tritone. So this means that the colour intervals that I mentioned, the 3rd and the 7th, in both the C7 and G flat 7, are the same. They share a common tritone interval, and that's why the substitution works. If I play the C7, followed by the G flat 7, you can hear how they do sound very similar, because they both have that tritone there present in the chord. And okay, only the root note there and the 5th is changing, but the colour notes, they stay the same. So then when we add that tritone substitution into our 2-5-1, and let's do this back in C major again, we've got the D minor 7, then the D flat 7, the C major 7. The D flat 7 there shares that tritone on the top of F natural and B natural. But what we get is this nice chromatic descent from 2 flat to 1. So 2 to 1, that, like I said, stepping stone back to our home at 1 from 2. So, okay, that nice stepping stone action back to home. And then again, we get the same effect with that 2, flat 2, 1. But there's even more pull there because it's the 2, then the flat 2, then the 1. Just that nice chromatic descent as opposed to that quite angular 2, 5, 1. Okay, so that's the tritone substitution. Now, just as one added extra, we can also combine tritone substitutions with the secondary dominant chords that I've already covered in a previous lesson that I'll link to below. A secondary dominant chord is a substitution where we take a chord that shouldn't be a dominant 7 chord and we turn it into a dominant 7 chord, mainly so we can add pull to another chord using a temporary 5-to-1 relationship. So, in the key of C major, the order of chords in the key is C major 7, D minor 7, E minor 7, F major 7, G7, A minor 7, and B minor 7 flat 5. So you need to know that. So that's the order of chords in the key. And there's only one dominant 7 chord in there, that G7. But as an example of a secondary dominant chord, we could turn that A minor 7 into an A7 if we want greater pull to the D minor 7 in a chord progression. So if we were to take a 1-6-2-5 chord progression in the key of C, we'd have C major 7, A minor 7, D minor 7, G7, which you'll probably know from rhythm changes. I got rhythm. Nice little turnaround there. You can hear that stepping stone motion. We start on the C, we jump to the relative minor, that A minor, and then just stepping stone back to the C, okay? Okay, so that's a 1-6-2-5 progression. So the A minor 7 and the D minor 7 in there, that's what they are in the key for chord 6 and chord 2. But if we turn the A minor 7 to A7, that gives us a bit more pull to the D minor 7, as if we're temporarily in D minor. We haven't modulated at all, it's just to give it that pull, okay? And it gives it a different effect, a little bit of spice. So if I now play an A7 instead of A minor 7 in that 1-6-2-5, that's a secondary dominant chord. So here it is just as A minor 7. And now, okay, just a little bit of an effect there, that secondary dominant. We could also apply a secondary dominant to the D minor 7. So we could turn that into a D7. Okay, so little bit of colour and it gives us that 5-to-1 pull on the G7, okay? Or we could do it to both of them. So we could turn the A minor 7 into A7 and then the D minor 7 to D7. So we pretty much get all dominant 7 chords apart from chord 1. So C major 7, A7, D7, G7. Here are the chord progression, the function of all of that, it all stays intact. We've still got that stepwise motion, it's fully diatonic. And then with the secondary dominants, just goes a bit more game show when it's in isolation like that. So that's secondary dominant chords in action. But remember what I said about tritone substitutions. We're applying that to dominant 7 chords. So as well as the G7 in there, we can actually apply the tritone substitution to the secondary dominants. Okay, so it's a tritone of a secondary dominant. So if we take the A minor 7 in that 1-6-2-5 progression in C, turn it into an A7, then we can apply the tritone substitution. So what's a tritone away from an A? Well, it's an E flat. So we could apply the E flat 7 to the progression. So now instead of C major 7, A minor 7, D minor 7, G7, we actually get C major 7, E flat 7, D minor 7, G7. Notice how it still has that rough sound of that 1-6-2-5. So again, back to normal. Now. Okay, so. Okay, and we could do the same thing for the D minor 7. So D minor 7 becomes D7, which you can then change to an A flat 7. So we could have a chord progression like this: C major 7, A minor 7, then A flat 7 to the G7. So we're getting that little chromatic move down there. So, or we could change the A minor 7 to the A7 as well. Okay, here are the progression. That stepping stone back is always the same. Or take the C major 7, move up to the E flat 7, tritone of the A minor 7, then D minor 7, and then D flat 7, tritone substitution of the G7. So And that just gives us that nice chromatic E flat, D, D minus, D flat to the C, so. Okay, so however you want to do it. That time I actually changed the D minor 7 to the D7, so that's another version. So you could have C major 7, E flat 7, D7, D flat 7, and back. Okay, so all I'm doing here is taking a basic 1-6-2-5 progression and then just adding secondary dominants and then applying tritone substitution to them. I know that sentence sounds quite, theory if you don't know what they are. But as soon as you know what a tritone substitution is and you know what a secondary dominant is, all of a sudden it just becomes a bunch of possibilities. Now, how would you apply these? In terms of a chord progression, well, that's all based on the melody and, what you're wanting to portray. I mean, that's where the art comes into it. But in terms of the nuts and bolts of what they are, you can see there that it just gives us a lot of different possibilities on a very basic chord progression. Now, how does this affect us as bass players? Well, this is something that you do hear a lot by pianists and guitarists as they switch up the chords in a progression. They'll put all manner of different substitutions into the progression while us bass players hold down the basic structure of the harmony. And it's also something that you can apply in arranging and composition to create interest in your harmonizations. But if used tastefully, you can use tritone substitutions in your walking bass lines, and you can certainly use them in your solos. And that's something that I'm going to be covering in upcoming lessons. But for now, just get to grips with the basic idea of what a tritone substitution is and try playing those sample progressions as chords and as arpeggios. Okay, please like, comment and subscribe to the channel and follow the link below for the lesson material. Then you can sign up to the TalkingBass network and membership to gain access to a massive community of like-minded bass players and a ton of bass practice resources and downloads. Okay, I'll see you next week.